Thank you so much for participating in our Courageous Conversation, the second session that's focused on employee voices. I want to say that we're opening the second Courageous Conversations, in the same way that we opened the first one that focused on our student voices. So for those of you who came and listened or participated in that one, our opening remarks may sound familiar. So I want to start by acknowledging that Fitchburg State is a community of learners whose campus sits on the traditional homelands of the people of the Pennacook, Nipmuc, and the Wabanaki Confederacy. We recognize and respect these peoples as the traditional stewards of the land and are grateful that we're able to use this land for educational purposes. I want to note that we are recording this, so we're going to be able to go back and hear the conversation firsthand as we plan our path forward. I am Laura Bayless, and I'm the Vice President for Student Affairs, and I co-chair the Fitchburg State University Leading for Change team. Leading for Change is our university-level committee that focuses on issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion. And the next couple of speakers in this brief introduction are my co-chairs. They are Dr. Alberto Cardea, the Provost and Vice President for Academic Affairs, and Ms. Jessica Murdoch, who is the Associate Vice President for Human Resources and Payroll Services. You can see that between the three of us, we bring the lenses of students, employees, the curriculum, and the co-curriculum to the table, and that is by design. Leading for Change and the Center for Diversity and Inclusion have launched this Courageous Conversations series to provide a forum for our community to come together, speak our truths, and take actions in community. We plan to carry these courageous conversations forward throughout the academic year. And this first set this summer is focused on the theme, All Lives Can't Matter Until Black Lives Matter. We chose this theme because we've been hearing a lot of, well, all lives matter, in response to Black Lives Matter. And that response, all lives matter, entirely misses the point. Black lives have not mattered since the Europeans took this land from the Native Americans, starting in the 1600s, bringing enslaved people from Africa and the Caribbean with them. And spring and summer 2020 have shined a light on the systemic racism on which our country was built. Of course, the murders of folks like George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Rayshard Brooks and Breonna Taylor, which are just the most recent in a long series of these kinds of killings, are stark examples of that systemic racism. But even COVID-19 disproportionately affects the Black community in so many ways. Lack of access to healthcare, disproportionately in jobs that either have disappeared or are deemed essential, but put employees at greater risk because they can't be performed remotely, living in places where it's more difficult to socially distance, and the list goes on. Fitchburg State's mission has always been focused on access and student success. Our student body is changing, our faculty and staff makeup is changing, and so higher education and Fitchburg State University must change as well. The time is now for us to define and commit to action steps that address institutional bias and educate our community members to develop knowledge, skills, and abilities to be anti-racist and to exhibit cultural competence and humility. If you saw the video inviting the Fitchburg State community into these courageous conversations, you know that senior leadership, staff, faculty, and student leaders have all made a commitment to engage in these courageous conversations, listen, and take action. Thank you for being willing to participate in these courageous conversations. I invite your voice this afternoon, both in the conversation and through an anonymous web form where you can post your comments. Shane, would you please post the link? He's also going to post it occasionally throughout the conversation. We're going to be pulling some questions from the anonymous web form during this conversation and posting them into the chat. Also, for those of you with us on Google Meet, watch the chat as we're going to be posting resources that pertain to the discussion. Dr. Cardea, would you share a little bit more about the conversations we've had on campus regarding these issues and the work that's already in progress?
Thank you, Dr. Bayless. As Laura mentioned, my name's Alberto Cardea, and I'm the Provost and Vice President for Academic Affairs here at Fitchburg State, and very happy that I co-chair the Leading for Change, both with Dr. Bayless and with Associate Vice President Jess Murdoch. We understand that what we will talk about, what I'm going to talk a little bit about right now, about some of the actions and some of the activities we've been doing, is not sufficient. Have not been sufficient changes and not sufficient progress. But they have been necessary as a precursor to what we will continue to build. We also understand that words and events like today are hollow if they don't have actions that the institution commits to following, collecting this information, having these conversations. And in the event that we don't have the opportunity to do that at the end, which we'll try, but if we have a really good discussion and we end up wrapping up quickly, please be assured that we have sponsored these courageous conversations. We have senior leadership either leading these discussions or on the call, on the event, listening, because there is a commitment to making sure that we respond to it, and that's a little bit of what Vice President Murdoch will talk about. Over the last 5 years, albeit still inadequate, we understand for the challenges that we face, we've had these discussions. We've had tried to bring the institution to a forefront, to these issues to the forefront of the institution. For example, 2 years ago, we had a campus climate survey that was completed, which, by the way, we were already planning to launch this fall, relaunch it again this fall, so we can collect the data and compare it to previous data. So that was something that was already planned. It was, but clearly it is even of greater importance now. We also did a listening tour and a listening sessions with various student groups and with faculty and staff of color in this fall. And we were planning another one in the spring, and we were not able to bring it to fruition because of the COVID-19 disruption. But we've used, and we plan to use the current discussions, the ones that we've had before, to do many additional planning and interventions. For instance, the campus climate was discussed at all the departmental meetings. It was used as a basis for training from the student affairs and for staff training. It was used by various departments came together to develop an inclusive excellence in the STEM field, to develop a grant proposal that has been submitted for funding. So we have used that information to continue to grow and to try to strengthen the programming available. In addition to that, work, the Leading for Change has held various sessions, roundtables with students, additional training. There was white fragility presentation, other conversations on campus. We've had educational and training for employees, faculty, and students. The last previous three development days have been around the issues of inclusive, and actually Dr. Deborah Joy Paris, who will be speaking to us in a little bit here, spoke at one of our development days on the issue of inclusive advising. We are also planning to make the CDI programming much more effective and putting some additional resources into that. We will going to highlight some of our social justice academic programming, make some funding available for additional programming. and using the student affairs using its other models that it has is going to create a bias response protocol to allow us to be better prepared to respond to issues and concerns of bias that may be brought to our attention. So there's a lot that we have moved on. Clearly, it is not enough. Clearly, there is a lot more to do. Clearly, we can all learn and grow, and I'm hoping, and I know for sure, if today is anything like our session on Tuesday, that we will learn a lot today. We will become a closer community because of it. But we will continue to build on that, which actually then leads perfectly into the message that we had asked Associate Vice President Jess Murdoch to provide you as one of our co-chairs from the Leading for Change. Jess?
So good afternoon, everyone. I first just want to say thank you all for taking some time today to be with us. It's such an important topic, and there's so much for us to do as an institution and as a community. So I really just cannot tell you or give you enough thanks for being here and joining us. And I want to also thank Dr. Cardea and Dr. Bayless for being such wonderful allies to this topic and to continuing to move us forward in the right direction. My role today is pretty simple in the sense of I want to hear from you. I want to capture information, and what we've done over the last week as we've had an opportunity to speak with our students and having our first Courageous Conversation on the 23rd of June. And we were able to take some wonderful notes and learn about different themes and different reports of information that we can build our community and build our support around. And so today will be the same. We're going to take as much information as we can and gather from this group. I hope that you will all feel comfortable in sharing information. Laura has her notebook ready, as I do. And we want you to share as much information that you feel comfortable in doing. And we know and want to share that this is a safe place for you to do so. You can also, I just want to reiterate, use the chat feature or the anonymous request, and Shane has put that out there on the chat feature as well. And I did send it in the email reminder to staff. So with that, we're going to take all of these action items and themes and start helping us form different kinds of programming and thoughtful dialogue about these topics, and then also help form our 2020 to 2025 strategic plan and really build in that part or this conversation into that plan. So again, with that said, I just want to thank you all, and I look forward to our conversation this afternoon. I do want to share, I'm so sorry, my next prompt is I want to just welcome and thank Dr. Demisty Bellinger-Delfield. Demisty is going to share some thoughts from the MSCA Union today, and then from there we will move on. Alberto will welcome Dr. Press, and then we'll start our programming from there. Thank you. Thank you, Demisty. You're on mute, Demisty. Thank
Sorry.
you.
Hi. So the questions that, well, the first thing I thought when I saw, and this is not from the union, this is for myself, when I saw that these conversations were happening, is that wouldn't it be great if there was a diversity director that was sending this to us, asking us to have this conversation. And I know our school doesn't have a diversity director, and I know the issue right now with finances, but again and again, I have thought at Fitchburg State that we are lacking in that aspect, and we don't have a person, well, we have HR, but really outside of that, as at other institutions, we don't have a person who, faculty or staff of color, BIPOC, or students can go to with problems that are unique to issues of inclusion and diversity. Some of the things that the union are interested in knowing, What are community relations like between police and people of color in Fitchburg? And what can the university do to improve community relations between police and people of color, both on and off campus? How we can each personally contribute to making our campus community a safe and inclusive environment? What has been experienced with people either on or off campus? And I can speak to that, what my experiences have been. And how's your working life impacted by my identity? And I, of course, can speak to that too. Other things that were raised by Aruna for me to talk about, how has the recent protests toward police brutality and criminal justice online would experience the current strength of interest in Black Lives Matter movement? And what is our responsibility as a state institution to provide platforms for students, faculty, and staff? And that could be something, or that is things like this conversation. How has this moment in history influenced the understanding of white employees, both faculty and staff, and their experience of the systemic oppression of Black people? Am I still there?
Yeah, Dennis, you keep freezing. I'm so
Am I still
sorry. I
here?
know that you're trying to. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. It's just like everyone else's screen has frozen. Am I being heard?
I can hear you now. There was just a couple of frozen moments and you were breaking up, and I know that you wanted to try to make a, kind of a brief statement on behalf of the union, and I just didn't want to take away from that, but we were having a hard time talking or hearing you, so I just wanted to let you know.
Okay, all right. Okay, all right. The last thing I want to say is Black in the Ivory Tower is trending on Twitter lately, and the effects that Black scholars have on their campuses throughout the country. And that's something we can talk about too.
Thank you, Demisty. And we look forward to you joining us, staying on and joining us in the conversation. So part of this conversation, when we were planning these conversations, one of the components that came across was the importance of having an educational component to it, sort of setting the stage, setting the context, and then opening it up for those discussions, which we will then spend most of our time doing. So for this session, we have asked Dr. Deborah Joy Perez, who's a colleague and a friend. She's a Senior Vice President of Organizational Culture and Inclusion and Equity at Simmons University in Boston. She is responsible for advancing diversity of inclusive practices across the university, which includes working with the faculty, staff, and students to create that welcoming campus. Dr. Perez reports to the president and works in partnership across all the leadership team. So we thought Dr. Perez could be a fantastic speaker for this topic. It would take me another 10 minutes to read her complete bio. She has extensive experience in the field previous to joining higher ed, having worked for 3 major national foundations, and always a champion for inclusion of people of color and minoritized populations. So with that introduction, which is brief compared to her accomplishments, I'd like to introduce Deborah. Deborah?
Thank you so much. Muchas gracias, Alberto. So I'm going to try and share my screen. Give me 1 second. And please tell me if I'm successful in doing this and if you can hear me. Hopefully this will work.
Yeah.
It worked.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, and is it showing in presentation style or just?
No, it's showing in regular style right now. It's
okay. Does that work, Alberto?
yeah.
Do you see the? Okay, great. Well, good afternoon and welcome everyone. I will just say what a thrill it is for me to be back virtually with Fitchburg. I do remember that conversation that we had back in the, on equity and inclusion when I was there in person. I'm so pleased to be here, and I just wanted to share a few kind of bits of information about how to approach this conversation, these courageous conversations.
Deborah, I hate to interrupt you, but your screen is only showing half. So you may need to get off of presentation mode. I'm sorry, I don't know why. That works. That'll work.
Okay, this will work. Can you see that?
Yes, that works.
Oh, but if I do presentation mode, it doesn't work. If I do this, you don't see it.
Oh, now we do.
Okay. So that you should be seeing the full screen now, correct?
Yep, we see the full screen. Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay, so what are courageous conversations? Courageous conversations are difficult. They're painful. They can be triggering. So I just want to prepare all 100+ of you that this is not going to be an easy conversation, but hopefully will inspire change and commitment. I'm so pleased to see so many people on this conversation, in this conversation. It is not easy to have a conversation about what's currently happening in the United States. And, you know, like many colleges and universities across the country, people of color are seriously underrepresented. And so many of the people that I at least see on the screen may identify as part of a dominant culture. And let me, as I talk about that, I'm mindful of the fact that there are very many definitions to what dominant might mean in the context of the current police violence. We're talking about white culture, but we could also be talking about LGBT with regard to homophobia and transphobia. We could be talking about heterosexual culture as dominant culture. We can talk about able-bodied culture as a dominant culture in comparison to differently abled. And we can be talking about a Christianity as a dominant culture as compared to other faiths, right? So take what I'm about to share with you in the context of the racial anxiety that exists now, but the lessons here on how to manage and navigate the oppression of dominant culture applies to other forms. I just want to be clear about that. I'm so glad that Laura started with the land acknowledgement. That's very important to me personally. It's a principle and value of mine. I also want to acknowledge that I go by she, her, hers, and not all of us share the identity or the pronouns that we were born in. So here's what I'm hoping to cover. I invite you all to follow me on Twitter. There's a lot of conversation, as you can only imagine, in this day and age around what's going on in this country with regard to our failure to achieve equity after 400 years, right? Where's the promise of a fair society, of the founding of the principles of democracy? So I'll talk a little bit about that context, the dominant culture, a little bit about emotional labor, and what I think I propose is one of the challenges of a progressive movement is this current culture of canceling and calling out, which I don't think is very helpful to any social movement without deep work. So I'm a big fan of Paulo Freire, and I'll just say that you know, no one is fully formed. It is through their self-experience in the world that we become what we are. And the fact that you're here means you're having a new shared experience with your colleagues. So I would invite everyone here to identify a buddy on this call to have a conversation about this experience. And I would say to my white colleagues that you should find a white colleague to talk to. And I'll say more about why that's so. And for the people of color, you should talk to another person of color, because the conversation will be different, right? So what's the context? Well, I don't know if this will work, but let me see if it does. I would like for you to see this. Oh, it's not working. Hold on. Let me know, Alberto, if you can see this. You can hear, Alberto?
Yeah.
Protesters and workers gathered in large numbers all across the United States,
demanding justice after the death of George Floyd.
coast to coast. We're seeing these demonstrations we haven't seen yet against racial injustice and police brutality.
Take a walk with me. Let's pretend just to be friends. You're no better than me. I'd like to ask you some questions and we could speak honestly. What do you feel when you see all the homeless on the street? Who do you pray for at night before you go to sleep? What do you feel when you look in the mirror? Are you right?
Deborah, we're only
Yeah.
hearing the video, the audio, not the video.
All right, well, let me stop because the video is what matters, right? So,
Right.
Okay, let me see if I can go back to the PowerPoint. My apologies. How about now? Do you see the slide? Do you see the slide? Hello?
We do.
We-
We see the slide. It was the YouTube video, and then it just went over to Martin Luther King. You're on that
Yeah,
slide.
that's fine.
Yep.
Yeah, that's fine. I will, if you can hear me, I'll share the links with Alberto so you can see it. The poignant pictures are what matters in that video. So the song is beautiful, obviously. It was written by Pink 14 years ago, right? And it was under the Bush administration. And it's now been re-recorded with the images of Black Lives Matter. The point is that we have been here before, and we can, with dedicated and concerted effort, be better, right? And so I want to talk a little bit about context, which is what I've been asked to do, and say that as much prayer and hope and thoughts that go out into address or to comfort those who have been impacted by police brutality, nothing will address it unless we take it as a systemic and bold move, right? So it's more than just compassion, as Martin Luther King said. It's more than flinging a coin at a beggar. It comes from questioning the edifice that produced the beggar and to do restructuring. And so that's what's needed in doing the restructuring, right? So there are other, I'm not going to do this because I don't want this to have another snafu, but there are so many resources out there. If you are new to this conversation about systemic and systematic racism, the Google is your friend. There are many sources right now who have taken the time to cultivate and curate some very carefully crafted reading lists on anti-racism, not just Ibram Kendi's book, but multiple sources. I just saw one again yesterday at the Harvard Gazette, starting point for people who want to be serious about their self-education around systemic racism. So I also want to point out, and I might have pointed this out when I met you in person, and that is that we are an increasingly brown population in this country, and our wealth and our survival depends on the success and how well the brown population thrives. We are also an increasingly aging population, so we're graying and browning at the same time. And why is that important? It's important because our Social Security safety net was designed so that we would have more workers than retirees. But the longer we live, the fewer workers there are. So when this system was founded in the late 50s, early 60s, there were almost 9 workers per retiree. In about 2005, that went down to only 3 and a little over 3 workers per every retiree. Where we are now, and will be for the next 10, 30, 20 years, in 2040, there will only 2 working adults for every retiree, and one of those 2 people will be a person of color. So how must we invest in communities of color in order for them to thrive and contribute to a system that we all depend on? The context in terms of research is clear. People of color are disproportionately living in neighborhoods that experience both high poverty and a concentration of kids of color in schools that are low quality. More than 70% of Black and Hispanic students are in schools that are both high poverty and high minority. In the 100 largest metro areas, children of color experience levels of isolation and very low opportunity, meaning there are no jobs where they live. I can't say enough about the correlation between being in a poor neighborhood and being in an unhealthy community. If you're in a wealthy community, you are in a healthy community. And the bottom line in this slide is that if you are in a poor, unhealthy community, you are more likely to have liquor stores than grocery stores. And finally, there's the intersection of education and wealth, right? So the more education one has, the more likelihood that their children will have access to education. So if you have a bachelor's degree, the likelihood of your child achieving a bachelor's degree by the time they're a sophomore in high school is about 50%. If you have a master's degree, the likelihood of your child getting a bachelor's degree by the time they are a sophomore in high school is about 65%. If your parents have less than a high school education, the likelihood of you getting a college education by the time you reach sophomore year in high school is only 6%. And I know that there are many people on this call who are first generation students and what that struggle is like. I'm certainly one of those people. And so we need to think about the intergenerational consequences of racism, sexism, and all these other systemic oppressions. One thing that I think is equally important to note is that immigration into this country is correlated with poor health. In fact, the longer an immigrant is in this country, and this is data on Latinos, but applies to other immigrants, the more poor their health will become. They have more poor mental health. They have a higher morbidity and higher mortality, et cetera, and have risk and associated with mental health, which is also associated with experience of discrimination. So if you take all of this into context, the bottom line for many minorities in this country and what we're seeing play out with COVID is that people of color live sicker and they die younger. And what we know about COVID today in terms of inequities is that in every stage of the COVID process, people of color were disenfranchised and disadvantaged. In early testing, for example, the people who received the test were those who were quote unquote traveled internationally, not the people who had high comorbidities or who were prone to diabetes or other chronic conditions. And the people who are likely to travel internationally are not disproportionately people of color. The infection rates are higher among people of color, particularly Black Americans. The death rates are higher. Someone made the point earlier about essential workers versus privileged workers. What makes a worker essential is that it doesn't necessarily mean that they're privileged, right? You can be an essential worker and still earn below living wage. You can be an essential worker and not have the luxury of sick time and staying home. When we started to enforce the physical distancing rules, it was Black folks who were getting citations and kicked out of grocery stores and kicked out of drugstores because they weren't wearing masks. And in some cases, they were kicked out because they wore a mask because they would appear to whites as being threatening. So COVID has not exacerbated the disparities. They've always existed. They are becoming more visible to some who haven't, but they have always been visible. We chose not to act. So undergirding all of these barriers and equity is racism, and there are many definitions. This is the one that I use, which is it's the combination of prejudice and power, and undergirding this is this notion of dominant culture. So what is dominant culture? The purpose of dominant culture is to keep racism going. If we live in a culture that teaches us continually that dominant culture is better, then we will all internalize that belief. Even as we claim we are not racist, we have been conditioned into the racist belief that dominant culture is better. There's a woman whose name right now escapes me, who's famous for having done the blue eye, brown eye experiment in her classroom. And one of the things she does in her session, she asks all the audience members who are white to raise their hand if they would be willing to trade places with a Black person. And no one raises their hand, right? So we know that the culture, the dominant culture, is designed to make certain groups appear to be better and more elevated, and which is a source of what many people call implicit bias. This conditioning is so strong that children as young as 3 years of age understand that white is better and black and brown are the bottom of the racial hierarchy. And needless to say, this is a false hierarchy of human value, but it's a hierarchy nonetheless. And I'm sure you've seen the experiments in social psychology of 3-year-old kids asked if they would choose the black doll or the white doll, and black and brown kids are choosing white dolls because the white dolls are good, right? The evidence is overwhelming. No one can deny. So what is dominant culture? I would invite everyone on this session to go to the workbook of social change by Jones and Okun to talk about the dominant culture. And these are some of the characteristics: perfectionism, either or thinking, right to comfort. I'm not going to read them all, but these are things that lead to the culture that we have and perpetuate bias and racist ideology. I'm not going to go through all of those on the list. I want to mention a couple. One is the immediate defensiveness that people show up and deny, and maybe it's had something to do with the feelings like, I am personally not responsible for racism. My parents and grandparents are not responsible, but really seeing any calls for change as criticism, denying that racism exists, and in fact blaming those who even name racism. The cost of what I was referring to earlier about the charge for change falls disproportionately on people of color, and that's what we call emotional labor. So I know you've all had the benefit of reviewing and maybe even hearing Robin DiAngelo talk about white fragility, but as this cartoon demonstrates, it's this notion of going to the nearest person of color and ask for absolution and for to get confirmation that you are not a racist. That is what emotional labor is, right? It's having to respond to the demand for comfort of the people around you who don't have your shared lived experience. And that is one of the most common threats to anti-racist work, is that right to comfort. So the dominant culture, in this case white, and again we can insert Christian, we can insert heterosexual, etc., believing they have a right to emotional and psychic safety, blaming whoever's making the dominant culture uncomfortable rather than focusing on the problem being named. Dominant culture equating their experience of unfairness with systemic racism, i.e. reverse racism. Dominant culture expecting the world to be fair for dominant culture primarily. Dominant culture expecting their feelings and questions to be addressed in their time frame and on their own terms so that they can feel better quickly. What happens in white fragility? Someone gets emotional upset because they're being accused, or they think they're being accused of perpetuating privilege or being racist, and suddenly the conversation comes to a grinding halt and all the attention turns to bringing comfort to that person who's uncomfortable, right? And there are things you can do. There are tactical things that you can do in order to avoid situations like that. And part of it is just really sitting with that discomfort, right? Sitting with your feelings and sharing those feelings, but with other white colleagues, not with your colleagues of color. Taking responsibility for what's happening in your body. What are you feeling? Why are you feeling that way? What can you do to find comfort on your own, right? By educating yourself about white supremacy and racism. So I guess this is the last thing I'm going to share with you, and that is, I'm having a lot of conversation about this cancel culture, this call out culture. We are all responsible for the change we want to see in our society, and this idea that there's some of us who are victims or conditioned by racism and some of us are not is false. We all live in a racist culture, and we all have room to grow, regardless of where you are. Growth requires change. The lesson hurts before it teaches. So calling people out is not healthy. Calling them in instead and calling them out. Accountability through collective action. If you're trying to grow, try the 21-day anti-racist challenge and educate yourself on how to notice unfairness and inequity. take risks, make mistakes, learn, and apologize. As a Latina lesbian, I can tell you that I have mistakenly gendered, used the wrong gender with some of our transgender students who prefer to go by they. And to me, it was really difficult to kind of remember that they go by they. And so when I made the mistake of calling them she, I would apologize, and we learn and we keep going. You know, organize around mutual interests. There's enough for everyone. This notion that we have to sacrifice something for justice is like the liberation of this country is good for everyone, right? And we all envision a society where we struggle together with love, justice, human dignity, and a sustainable world. So the bottom line here is that liberation is possible, but it has to be intentional. It has to be, measurable, and it has to be in community. And with that, I'll stop sharing and turn it back over to you, Alberto.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you very much for that. I think that sets the stage very well for our next part, which I'll pass on to Kristen Murphy to introduce our facilitator. Once again, thank you, Deborah, for sharing that.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kristen Murphy. I work in the HR office, and I work primarily with our Equal Opportunity Plan and helping to address matters of equity on campus when they come up against our expectations. It is my privilege to introduce our facilitator today for our conversation, so we can dive right in. I will need that brief. Dr. Shelley Nicholson is a trained dialogue facilitator through the American Association of State Colleges and Universities. She is currently the director of the Brewer Center for Civic Learning and Community Engagement at Mount Wachusett Community College. She has been facilitating discussions around race, privilege, and social justice issues for the past 5 years on the campus at Mount Wachusett Community College. Please welcome Shelley.
Shelley, you're still on mute. I think we have a technical difficulty, so let's see. Steve, are you able to unmute her by any chance?
No, I cannot unmute someone.
Okay. Then let us hold on for a moment. Oh, Shelley?
Did it? Yep.
It did. Yay. Thank
you.
No
problem. No problem.
Excellent.
I want to thank you all for having me. I want to thank Dr. Perez for those wonderful words and really putting into perspective a lot of the things that we've been grappling with lately. As Kristen said, I've been having similar conversations at the Mount, and I'm looking forward to hear what Fitchburg State has to say on this important topic. I want to acknowledge that I am white and all the privilege that goes with that, and especially how that impacts any conversation that I engage in around race. I think it's very important to acknowledge who we are and then the impact that can have on others. So I am not going to spend a lot of time talking because I really do want to hear from you all, but I'm going to set a few guidelines. First of which is, if you have questions, please place them in the chat feature. There's no guarantee we're actually going to get to all the questions, but even those that we don't get to will be passed on to the planning committee so that they can be addressed in a different forum, perhaps at a different time. And I would love everyone to please use the most respectful and inclusive language as possible, although we don't want to silence anyone. So if you're struggling, put that out there to the group and we'll help you kind of figure out the best way to communicate what you're trying to say. And I want to echo what Dr. Perez said in saying that we as a community, and right now I consider myself a part of your community, should be conscious of the unpaid emotional labor of our Black and Brown colleagues. It is an unquestionably hard time, given everything that's going on, and throw COVID on top of that and the social isolation that we're all experiencing. So I just want to be cognizant of, it is not the job of people of color to explain, to educate, or to even answer questions on racial justice. That's some of the hard work that we as white people need to start doing. And so I just wanted to put that out there as a ground rule for this discussion. With that, I'm going to jump right into the first question. How have you personally or professionally been impacted by the recent social unrest? If you want to share, just unmic yourself.
Shelley, I'll share one thing, from a perspective, I guess from a personal perspective, is that I think that often, and especially with all of the pandemic and all of the challenges that are going around in the world, is trying to really identify on how to be a strong ally, and really trying to identify and understand all of the information that is out there, and how to stay educated, and how to stay inclusive, and I know that it's hard, and I think it weighs on everyone, because I think you need to be considerate and conscientious of how you're talking, and how to be inclusive, and how to be transparent, and how to engage. And so I think conversations like this, just for me personally, really helps bring us together as a community, but also I feel as a person, and I take my human resources hat off at the moment, that it helps identify and figure out where I can be as a person to help foster further conversations and dialogue, even outside of the university. I have a young daughter in high school, and it's been really interesting to hear the conversations that she has with her friends about what's going on, and the challenges that every age is feeling. So I'm really excited about being afforded an opportunity to have more dialogue. So I do hope others will share their thoughts, from a personal perspective as well.
Thank you, Jessica. So to repeat the question, how have you been impacted by the recent social unrest? And I'm also a faculty member, so I'm really good at uncomfortable silences when I ask a question.
I would like to share something. It's very difficult sometimes to be your ethnic self around the faculty that impose their cultural way of being just by reacting to ways you say things, words you choose to say, in which you choose to say certain thoughts. And I realized one time driving back home that, wow, it takes so much energy out of you to present yourself constantly in a certain way that it's just not you. So that is a very exhausting thing for me as a Latina woman.
Thank you for sharing that. We've heard similar conversations at the Mount. For those of you who are familiar with the term code switching. And it is, and again, that emotional labor that can be very tiring for individuals who don't relate to the dominant culture.
I guess I would like to answer that question, if that's possible. Can you hear me? I don't look at it as an arrest, but a reaction to injustice. So it probably feels like an arrest, or appears that way, but it's just people trying to voice their concerns and their desires of what they want to see, what they want to happen in our country. So.
Thank you. That's an important clarification. Language really does matter. I believe that we had someone else who was trying to break in. William?
Yeah, I'm a football coach here at the university, and I'm a school teacher by day. And to me, just having the conversations with my students, as well as our players, it kind of allows me to, as a white male, to kind of sit back and pause and just kind of learn from my students and my players who are, have had these experiences that I have no clue about. And so I think that it's afforded me personally an opportunity to kind of sit back and listen, and it's afforded our football program here at the university to kind of become stronger and become closer together and kind of learn from each other, which I think is I guess a positive out of the situation that we're seeing.
That's an excellent point. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's very important to have those conversations with students and then encourage them to have them with one another. Who else would like to share?
Hi, can you hear me? This is Annette Sullivan.
Yes.
So you asked how we've been impacted. One of the things that I just find it very difficult to sleep, and I feel terribly guilty that I haven't done more to help the situation, and I'm looking for ways to do more.
Thank you for sharing that. The idea of white guilt is a very common response to things. And when I give talks on white fragility and white privilege, one of the things that I always say that especially resonates with students is guilt isn't going to help anybody, but it's also a natural emotion. And it means we're human, and it means that we actually do have a yearning to want to do better. We just don't often know how to do it. And I really hope that this forum starts setting the stage for you all to share and exchange ideas on things that can be done, and especially considering we're still in the middle of a pandemic, what can be done and what can be done safely. So thank you for sharing that.
Hello?
Hello. Hi, Hank.
Hi, Shelley. Hank Parkinson, he, his, him. I also want to recognize that I'm speaking from a white male, though with privilege, and I understand and recognize that. I think the impact for me is just continuing to educate myself, and even on a higher level over this last few months. Been doing a lot of reading, participating in a lot of webinars, and just waking up. I guess I thought I was pretty in tune, but there's a lot I'm not, and I'm recognizing that, and I know that I can do better, and I'm willing to do better, and that's where I'm at right now.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that that's very important, recognizing that we all still have a lot of work to do, and then hopefully as a community figuring out a way to maybe help one another do some of that work and share some of the valuable resources.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
I could say that a way that the current situation has impacted me is that it has created a sense of hypervigilance, not only for myself, but as a mother of a young, dark-skinned Latino, and having to grapple with my own feelings of hypervigilance for myself and for him. Knowing that every time he leaves the house, I'm concerned because of the perception of Latino and dark-skinned individuals, and just hope that he comes home safely every time he goes out the door. So certainly an unrest and unsettled feeling for sure.
Thank you for sharing that. There's been a lot of conversations on our campus as well. We had a conversation about specifically talking to children about racism. I'm happy to share some of those resources with the rest of the group when we're done. I'll pass them on to Shane. I believe Kathleen McClellan was going to speak.
Thank you. It's Kat. I just can't figure out how to change how it shows up. Kat, they, them, theirs. Yeah, I just, along with Hank, have just been trying to spend a lot of time like reflecting on what I don't know and just trying to learn more and trying to think a lot about how to create like safer spaces in coordinate the tutoring center for students to speak up and implement policy, because like they're the things I know I don't know, and then beyond there are the things that I don't know that I don't know, that I don't have access to, and I feel like giving people with more direct knowledge the space to affect policy in a meaningful way is maybe something that can have some impact, perhaps.
Great, thank you.
You know, if I may share something. Oh, sorry, no, please go ahead, Rose.
Hi, I just wanted to share something. As a mother of a tall teenager, and my husband, it's been very emotional, and I've been very quiet and a bit withdrawn because it scares the crap out of me with the way how huge my son is and the current situation. And every time my husband leaves the house, I'm really like terrified until he comes home. And so is my son. So I'm grateful that we are having such conversation, and also maybe with this conversation it will help us do a bit better at the like as a university. When I brought my daughter, started at Fitchburg, and her friends, almost all of them have dropped out of the college. So I am wondering, you know, like hopefully with this conversation, it will help us maybe do better, or how can we do to support minority kids that are able to even step in the college. So it's a bit emotional for me, but I'm hoping that, you know, since we're having conversations, we'll see how best we can help these kids stay in school, because I know education will help.
Thank you for sharing that, Rose. Alberto, did you want to speak?
Well, I mean, yeah, I'll make a quick comment and then tack on to what Rose said. And I was wondering, based on the discussion, the presentation comments earlier about code switching, you know, for some of us, we've become very good at code switching. And as a Latino male, I've I've understood that it's important to do that in order to navigate the waters in many different across different sectors. But I'm wondering, you know, what this has brought to me is, you know, how much has that code switching not helped the situation? Has it exacerbated the situation because it's a certain level of acceptance, which I think is really what Rose was talking about there at the end, and that is, you know, what is it then that we can do here, you know, here at Fitchburg State to create those spaces, to, you know, how can we use the momentum and the strength and on the current movement to provide those platforms for our faculty, staff, and our students?
That's an excellent question, and only this group can define what's going to work for your community, but I think moving towards action steps is the natural next phase of opening the door to these conversations. Who else would like to share?
I'd like to. Can anyone hear me? William Cortesia in the Education Department, School of Education. On the risk of, you know, sounding repetitive, I think that what can we do is educate ourselves, educate our colleagues, educate our staff, not only our students. I mean, yes, the students are here for an education, but so are we. We are products of our education. We come from a system that miseducates, because there's a even more powerful situation than non-educating. It's miseducating. Noam Chomsky has a great book. It's called Miseducation. You know, I've heard people mention, you know, Freire, Paulo Freire, not only as an educator, but a sociologist myself and a fellow Brazilian. Paulo Freire talks about educating, not the other, educating us, creating courses, not diversity just for our students, but for our faculty as well. Professional development for all of us, not the white colleagues, the Latino colleagues, the Black colleagues. Some of us are Black and Latino. of us. And the time has passed. It's not that the time has come. The time has passed, and it's something that as a faculty and a proud faculty member of Fitchburg State, September 1st will be my 7th year, and I've been asking for that for my 7 years that I've been here. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that that's really important to consider. We like to think that our students come out of the K through 12 system with the traditional age students and join a higher ed institution with this certain amount of knowledge. And unfortunately, I think at least since my generation has been in school, a lot of that history that they're taught has not changed. And so they're getting it from a very one-sided perspective and not getting the full history and really a deep understanding of things. So it's often much more challenging when they reach the college level to be able to do that. And then those of us who grew up without it, figuring out ways to educate ourselves. I really appreciate that. Thank you. It looks like I have someone else waiting to talk. Monica?
Yep. Hi. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I work in student accounts, and the issues that I have with is that I have a 15-year-old and a 11-year-old, and so they see stuff on TV and then they come and ask me questions, and I try to give them the best answers I can. I tell them that you respect everybody, and the difficult thing is that I have family members that when we go out to like barbecues and stuff, they say things and the kids pick up on it, and it's negative things. And then they come to me and be like, oh, like our cousin said this. And I'm like, you know what? I'm like, that's just like, I don't know my situation. Like, I don't know, like I tell them like what I think it's good, but I don't know if I'm like teaching them good enough, you know, because like I'll admit it, at one time I didn't understand white privilege. I'm like, no, I'm not white privilege, and I thought all lives matter, but not until recently that I'm like, yeah, I am white privilege. I don't have to worry about walking down the street or having like being looked at a different way. And you know, I do think Black Lives Matter now. So it's like when the kids come to me and say all lives matter, I try to explain the difference. And yes, all lives matter, but at this point, like, we have to make Black Lives Matter, because there is a problem out there with this. And I'm just hoping I'm doing enough as a parent to teach my kids that, because working in student accounts, I do see the difference between, you know, Latino and, you know, all different nationalities that come in. And I do see that there are like certain kids that do struggle. And so I try to learn on that. Hank, I would be really interested. You said you were watching webinars and learning more about it. I'd be really interested to see which ones you're learning about, to see if there's things that I can like bring to my kids, because that's where I struggle, is that, you know, I love my family and stuff, but sometimes they just have that negative response, you know, oh, they're mad about the Confederate flag, you know, and they say their opinions. And, you know, I just tell the kids, like, and I hope I don't offend anybody, I'm like, we're not Black. We can't relate to how they feel, and we don't know how they feel. So we can't say if it's, you know, if it's right or wrong, because I don't know what it feels to be Black, and I don't know what it feels to be discriminated against.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm sure that there are many other people that have had the same concerns, having conversations with their children. I know I had a conversation that was very similar with my 76-year-old father the other day. So I think that just opening the door to those conversations is a great way to start. Dr. Bayless?
Yeah, let me just jump in with one logistical thing, and then there have been some things growing in me as I've been listening to folks. One is that we are going to be compiling all the resources that are being posted in the chat. So folks who are streaming us, never fear, you're going to have access to, there's a ton of resources that are in there already. It may be after the new website is launched, we'll need to be able to build the website in a way that makes a lot of sense after the new website is launched. So it's not probably going to be in the next couple of weeks, but never fear that we are capturing all of these resources and we're going to distribute them. I want to go back to one of the themes that's come out in a number of places, and that's it made me think about the work with belonging that we've been doing with our students. You know, we've been using the lens of how do we create the understanding that Fitchburg State is a place for every student. Our work for that has been really focused on students. And this conversation with comments from a number of folks, all the way back to Karina's comment that got translated as code switching, you know, through some of the other comments later on, made me feel like we may need to do both a belonging campaign and a restructuring of the culture so that all employees also know Fitchburg State is a place for you. And I'd be really interested to hear some more examples like Karina's about, you know, what are the things that are inherent in the Fitchburg State culture that make it so there's that additional work that has to be done to feel like one can fit in or one can succeed here? What are the things we need to know about the culture? You know, and I loved Alberto's framing of it, like, what did we lose by everyone, not everyone, but, you know, by folks code switching? We've lost something. We've lost some of the richness and understanding. So I'm very interested in what we need to know about the culture of the university to make sure everyone knows this is a place to belong and succeed.
That's an excellent question. Leaving it open to you all.
Hi, this is Laura Garofoli. Can you guys all hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I just wanted to hop in a little bit because there have been several themes that people have touched on that have really been weighing heavy on me lately. And you know, that this all started with the question of how have you been impacted? And I mean, I can't begin to tell you like all of the ways that this has been impacting me, from having, you know, very difficult conversations with my 11-year-old, to going back and having a re-examination of my own history as a person who comes from a mixed race home with a brown mom and a white dad, and thus growing up with a, you know, white name and being the one child in the family who was the lightest skin of all of the three of us siblings, you know, having sort of a benefit, but then also an argument, a constant argument with myself, you know, and hiding behind, because the message that I've gotten all my life within my home, within my, you know, my husband's family, because I too married a white man, and getting the constant messages that the brown side of me doesn't matter, that the brown side of me is less capable, is inferior, that I should capitalize on the white side of myself because that's the important meat. And so when I hear people talk about, you know, what's been lost, there's so much that's been lost. And a part of what is lost is that when my white colleagues hear me talk about how my Black and brown students are struggling, and struggling in ways that should never happen. A student should not go missing from your class for, you know, days or weeks, and, you know, we shouldn't not be tracking them down, and, you know, that our students can't form trusting bonds with all of us because how we are perceived as faculty. And there's so much that's lost there in, you know, that those of us who have experiences with racism in academia, within our homes, and having to listen to disgusting things and speak up against them, you know, we lose all of those things when we're mixed race, and we can, you know, sort of hide under cover if we are lighter in skin. But at the same time, you know, there's so much that's jumbled in my head. It's really been very, very hard watching all of this, and watching my students cry and struggle, and watching my colleagues cry and struggle, and feeling like crying and struggling with them, but also knowing that I am perceived through their eyes as a white woman because of how I have chosen to hide my ethnic background and my cultural background, and have not been taken seriously enough by my colleagues when I have spoken up on behalf of my Black and Brown students and my Black and Brown colleagues. So I just wanted to put that out there as well, that, you know, we may look privileged, we may, you know, be able to hide under, we've got alphabet soup after our names, but there are so many struggles that are happening that are really hard to watch. And I need to do a better job of letting my students and colleagues know that I do have understanding of racism, that I have experienced it, that I continue to experience it, but I also have not done a good enough job of fighting against it myself.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think you bring a really important perspective to the table. How we present to the outside world is how we're perceived, but we are complex individuals and we have very diverse backgrounds that don't always get acknowledged, and even when we try to put ourselves forward. So thank you. Again, I'm sure you're not the only person who's experiencing this, so I appreciate your voice in this. I would actually like to put someone on the spot and ask Dr. Cardea if he would be willing to come back on the line, because we had a few questions floating around the chat that I wanted to throw back at him, if that's possible.
I'm back here.
Hello. We had actually a comment which I thought was very interesting, referring back to the idea of unpaid labor by our Black and Brown colleagues. And the question was, how are we as an institution going to address this unequal distribution of labor? Putting you on the spot, don't expect an exact answer right now, but I wanted to bounce that to you. And we also had a question about changes to the CDI, and if you could possibly elaborate on what those might be.
Okay. Well, I'll take the prerogative and answer the first, and then pass on the second to my colleague, Dr. Bayless, who can comment more on that. But you know, that's a perpetual question, and one that many volumes have been written on, including you know, one by a colleague of mine and a colleague of Dr. Perez, called The Toxicity of the Ivory Tower. And it is this notion of, and our speaker on Tuesday called it the black tax in his particular, is that that emotional labor, the additional tax and costs to persons of color to carry this. And it is without a doubt a difficult balance, because I do sometimes think that you need to be able to feel that a person of color speaks with a certain level of legitimacy that some of our white allies may not feel like they have. So I think that is why it requires a very a community, an institution that is very comfortable having these discussions, to say that it's okay for my colleague, Dr. Bayless, to make a comment, that they feel, or be a champion of that, despite the fact that they may not feel as if, or because he mentioned that, you know, Dr. Parkinson, be able to say that despite the fact of being a white male and acknowledging his privilege, he is an ally. And so it is a difficult balance that doesn't really answer the question, other than being able, there's no real strategic set of steps that I think that we can do other than work to create the spaces to have these types of conversations. And I think I've heard things today, and people speak about things that I hadn't heard before, and I've already been here for a few years. So these are the kind of spaces that I think can make it comfortable for us to speak. So we commit ourselves to increasing that, and allowing folks to create those spaces, because we can create positions, we can create spaces, we can elevate positions. But sometimes that doesn't necessarily alleviate that emotional cost.
Thank you.
Laura,
I don't know if you had on the CDI.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about it. It isn't all fully formed yet, but we got a lot of specific feedback from students in particular, students of color in particular, about the focus and the lens that CDI has been using, not meeting their current needs and wishes. And so we are taking that into account. In the short term, we know that we're going to provide some additional supports for that office in various ways. Some of them are not really able to be talked about yet because they're still in process. We're going to refocus the work using the feedback that we receive from students. We're going to change the nature of the student positions in that office and make sure that they are trained and a little bit more outward facing than what the current roles are, and probably increase the number of paid students who are associated with that office. There is also training and education in a fairly deep way that's happening with both the Office of Student Development and the Center for Diversity and Inclusiveness staff. We have talked about starting a multicultural student council or something other than that, that brings together the identity-based student organizations, because we heard a strong pull that organizations want to collaborate differently than they have been before, and also have a space where the students are able to come together and talk and plan. Hank, is there anything else you want to add?
No, Laura, I think you covered it pretty well. I mean, there's we are taking it very seriously, and we have a lot of ideas, and we will be making changes and improvements going into the year. Thank you.
And these, what I'm saying are the short, let me just say real quick, and then it's you. These are the short-term changes that we are already in the process of implementing for 2020-21. I fully expect the institution, as part of the strategic plan, will be thinking differently about the structure that's in place at the university to be working with and furthering our equity and diversity and inclusion goals. All right, go ahead, Sean, sorry.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to pull us back to this question of, if you will, uncompensated labor that ends up being invisible to a lot of white staff and faculty at the institution. I've seen this personally, that students of color will frequently go to staff and faculty of color for informal and formal advising, and not go to an assigned advisor for the same sort of experience. And the result is can be very positive for these students. They are able to open up to faculty and staff of color in a way that is very valuable, and which can help to form a bond with the institution. But at the same time, on the flip side of that, the faculty and staff of color have sometimes an enormous burden, because what can end up happening is these students will reflect on some very difficult and challenging home situations, can reflect on incredible economic disparities between themselves and their fellow white students. And so there's this again, uncompensated, unpaid on many occasions, labor that's performed by faculty and staff of color. And I can tell you that I have heard the frustrations around this. Those frustrations get magnified when the institution has engaged in some important initiatives, which, and I'm going to be frank, in front of this audience of whatever, 117 people, some of these initiatives have actually been denigrated by white faculty in particular, but faculty and staff. And I have to say, to do the work, to do the important emotional and actual labor of advising students on a regular basis, and then to hear in the background the knit of people who don't feel that the work is important, don't feel it's part of their job, don't feel that the institution is adequately supporting it, but then don't do anything, is very frustrating to me. This is work that I've been engaged in for at least the last 5 years, and have in other contexts been engaged in for 10 years. And to see that these attitudes haven't changed on this campus, and that the burden really should fall on our white colleagues here, it is a very frustrating experience. And I will tell you that as I come back to the faculty, I'm eager to take up this conversation, because I think it's a very important one, and one that can be very easily ignored by my white colleagues. So thank you.
Thank you so much, team. That was our drop the mic moment. That was fantastic. You know, and I think a lot of what you speak to goes back to the idea of, you know, really doing the work and institutionalizing the work if you really want to see systemic change over time. So thank you so much for sharing that. I want to be conscious of people's time. We have about 8 minutes left of the official program. I'm not going anywhere. I don't have anything to do next, but I do want to be conscious of people making a certain time commitment and making sure that all voices have been heard. So is there anyone else who would like to share or even propose a topic for future discussion?
Hello? Can I be heard?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
We can hear
I
you.
feel like this is a conversation that is less for me. I'm one of the few people who is actually of color here, and more for white faculty and staff. I'm not saying that there is anything wrong with that, but you know, a lot of this is like, dude, I know, I live it. And I wonder if there should be a conversation that is geared more towards people who are unaware. That's one thing I want to say. Another thing I want to say is that a lot of times when we do have opportunity, for instance, when we had the overhaul of our curriculum for our students last year and the years before, we lost opportunity to address some issues that we could have addressed when naming our general education classes. Like, we don't have a race and gender class requirement. We do have a diversity requirement for classes, but that gets lost. And I fear, and I have feared, that our students are not getting the grounding that they need, not only at our institution, but when they leave our institution. I'm excited to hear that there are changes being made at CDI. I am curious to see what those are. Another thing that I've said since I've been here is that there needs to be more staff there, and there needs to be more mirroring of the students who are served by that office. That was one thing I was very surprised about when I first came to Fitchburg State, and one thing that I am still surprised about. One thing that I've been talking to other people on a grant with is there needs to be some space, and that has been said here today, for faculty, and more mentoring for faculty of color, and more of a nod towards hiring faculty and staff of color at this campus. I have seen improvement of that since I've been here. This is my 7th year, but I think that there is room for more. Again, I feel like maybe I was listening on a conversation that was not for me today. And I don't know how to say anything beyond that.
Well, thank you for saying that. I think that's important to acknowledge. I'm sure you're not the only person that feels that way. That's one of the conversations I've been engaging in with some of my colleagues of color, is for a lot of people who are white or in the majority in some way, shape, or form, these conversations have come as an eye-opener. You know, the events that we're seeing. Well, there's been a lot of people whose eyes have been open for a very long time and have been speaking very loudly and gone unheard. So I think it is really important to acknowledge that we are all coming from the very different places. Thank you. Dr. Perez, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, I did want to say that I actually think it would be healthy to have a faculty and staff of color only conversation, and a Black faculty and only conversation. And we at Simmons hosted our faculty and staff of color conversation, which included all those who identified as people of color. And even in that conversation, there is a range of understanding, appreciation, and realness, between different groups. So that's subsequent to that conversation. And just based on the conversation, so I'll just give you one example. It was, the non-Black people of color on the conversation were very empathetic and appreciative of what others were saying, and it felt difficult for the Black faculty and staff on that conversation because they were the only ones sharing. So we have subsequently set up a separate conversation for Black faculty only.
If we had a separate conversation like that here at Dr. Perez, it'll be a very small conversation of people.
Yeah, we don't have a very big, our less than 4% of our faculty are Black. So it is a small group, but even the 20 or 30 that show up are in need of that safe space, right?
Thank you. And it echoes one of the comments that came up in the suggestions to have smaller conversations, have more identity-based conversations, and have them in smaller forums. It's great to do this. This is not a bad thing to have these conversations large. And of course, we're in a virtual environment right now, but space does need to be made and should be made to have them on smaller levels, or use a virtual environment that allows you to facilitate small breakout rooms. There's a lot of different things that can be done to further the conversation. And I appreciate those of you who stepped forward today and shared your personal experiences, shared your concerns. We're willing to be vulnerable and say, I don't know what I need to do next. So with that, I'm gonna turn it back over to Dr. Cardea to close us out.
Oh, okay. Thank you. And please, I'll ask Dr. Bayless and Jessica also to wrap up. After me, we just wanted to make sure that we made it clear that we have heard. We understand that there's a lot of work to do. That we will work to create those spaces, and even if they're small, Demisti, they'll be powerful. We will expand on what we tried to start in the fall and create those spaces for faculty and staff of color to have those conversations and create those communities and those networks for self and internal support. In addition to all the other things that have been brought up, I can commit that there will be some specific action steps that will be announced, and we'll be ready to implement, starting in August and September, and whatever form we come back. So Laura, I didn't know if you, and Jess, if you wanted to say a few words.
I would add that just endorsing the idea that this is like the first conversation with employees in this stage of Fitchburg State's work on this. It is not going to be the last. And in this particular conversation, we heard from a lot of allies, I think. In the students' conversation, we heard a lot more about the experiences of our students of color than we did here. And so I'm already knowing that we're going to have to schedule another, probably multiple opportunities to capture that at a first pass, and then figure out what are the right formats, following that. So if folks have ideas about what would be a preferred format or structure for us to take the next step so that we can hear more from our BICOC colleagues that are employees, I would really value that, to be able to take it back to the Leading for Change team to figure out what that looks like next. Because this was a valuable conversation and not the conversation I thought we were going to have today. But as Alberto said, there will be more information coming out this summer that lists themes that we've heard, priorities, and with some specific action items that will be forthcoming even in the 2021 academic year.
And I just also, in concluding, because I had not done it before, thank everyone for taking the time to come, your time to us to be here and to contribute or just to listen. I think it's a testament to your commitment and belief to the institution. And as we've said, we will make sure that that it wasn't for naught, but that we will make progress. Thank you.
In view of time, thank you all again. As I mentioned, I was very appreciative of everyone joining today. We had such a wonderful group, and please know that we've heard everything that you have said. And this is just the beginning of hopefully what we will do to provide more development and growth. And it is about everyone on campus. It is not just about faculty. It is not just about students. It is about our community and what we can do to better provide dialogues and programming and development to create a community that we can all feel comfortable and proud and understand others' feelings and backgrounds. So I just want to thank everyone again for being here today and for all the good work of all the people that are participating in these programs. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you for organizing this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.